Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels gameplay. Today we're taking a look at a very exciting deck. It's a blue-white deck called Vial Production. It's basically a blue-white control deck, but it has a very particular win condition, which is just a single copy of a Mechanized Production, 2 and double blue for an enchantment aura that can enchant an artifact we control, and at the beginning of our upkeep we can make a token that's a copy of the enchanted artifact, and then if we control 8 or more copies of that same artifact, we win the game on the spot. So which artifact are we looking to copy with our Mechanized Production? Well, the answer is Alchemist's Vial. 2 mana for an artifact that draws us a card when it enters a battlefield, which also means whenever we make a copy of the Alchemist's Vial with our Mechanized Production, we get to draw an additional card. So we basically get our personal Howling Mine, where we get to draw 2 cards every turn instead of just 1. Plus we also still get to sacrifice the Alchemist's Vials if we want to prevent a creature from attacking or blocking, but usually we just try to save up as many Alchemist's Vials as possible so we can win the game as soon as we hit 8 copies. So we have 4 copies of Alchemist's Vial, alright, that's good, so we can pretty reliably find a copy, but we only have 1 Mechanized Production. So how can we more consistently find our 1 copy of Mechanized Production? The answer is Heliod's Pilgrim, 2 and a white for a 1/2 human cleric, that when she enters a battlefield we can search our library for an aura card and put it into our hand. So this is 4 additional ways basically of finding our Mechanized Production, which gives us a pretty reliable way of curving turn 2 Alchemist's Vial into turn 3 Heliod's Pilgrim into turn 4 Mechanized Production, and then we just have to survive 7 turns until we win the game. And then of course we also have some other auras that we can search up with the Heliod's Pilgrim that can help us survive long enough to win the game. So let's take a look at the entire deck, starting out with 2 copies of Sram, Senior Edificer, 1 and a white for a 2/2 creature that basically draws us an extra card whenever we cast an aura spell. The equipment and vehicle part is not relevant in this deck, so whenever we play one of our defensive enchantments basically we get to draw an additional card, which helps us find more answers to what the opponent's trying to do. So just a great fit in this kind of deck, and this is basically the only valuable creature we have in the deck. Otherwise the deck is very resilient to removal spells, because we basically don't care about our creatures, we just care about our Mechanized Production and trying to stop our opponent from killing us before we win. So very good deck against spot removal heavy decks. But Sram is the only exception of a creature you actually would like to keep around. Then of course the 4 copies of Alchemist's Vial, which we can also use to maybe prevent a creature from attacking if we're close to dead. Then we have 3 copies of Aether Meltdown, which is a very nice one. 1 and a blue for an enchant creature or vehicle that has flash, so we can basically play this at instant speed, and when Aether Meltdown enters a battlefield we get 2 energy, so that helps with our Aether Hubs so they can keep producing colored mana. And then the enchanted permanent gets -4/-0 permanently, so a very nice answer to most problematic creatures and vehicles. Also very nice against cards like Scrapheap Scrounger, since this is a nice answer to it, so it doesn't keep coming back. And of course it's an aura, so goes well with our Sram. If you can go turn 4, play the Sram, and then play the Aether Meltdown, you get to draw the card no matter what, since you get to draw the card when you cast the enchantment and not when it enters a battlefield. We also have a fun-off copy of Ice Over, which also enchants artifacts or creatures. So artifacts is mostly gonna be vehicles, and the enchanted permanent doesn't untap during the untap step. So this is a better answer to Smuggler's Copter, for example, than Aether Meltdown, because even with Aether Meltdown on a Smuggler's Copter, the opponent would still keep drawing and discarding to find better cards, while Ice Over puts a stop to that. We also have 2 copies of Blessed Alliance, another nice instant speed removal spell in this deck, which can make an opponent sacrifice an attacking creature and can also gain us 4 life. A great spell, but only 2 copies because it's kind of a non-bow with cards like Aether Meltdown, because if the opponent remembers to keep attacking with the creature even if it's enchanted with the Aether Meltdown, then they can just sacrifice the creature that's enchanted with the Meltdown instead of having to sacrifice a real creature to the Blessed Alliance. Then we also have 2 copies of Telling Time to smooth out our draw, help us find the missing pieces. Then of course the 4 Heliod's Pilgrim, which have a lot of targets in this deck, as you will see. We also have 1 copy of Imprisoned in the Moon, which is a nice answer to Planeswalkers, and can also enchant problematic creature lands, especially those with hexproof, which can be a problem for this deck. And of course it does kind of ramp the opponent if you enchant a Planeswalker with this, so it's not a super efficient answer, so that's why we only have the 1 copy. We also have a Containment Membrane, which is a nice one. So 2 and a blue for an enchant creature that makes the creature not untap during the untap step, but it also has Surge, which means if we already cast a spell, we can just pay single blue for the Membrane. So this goes well with our Sram, since we can go turn 3 Sram plus Membrane and get to draw a card right away. Also goes well with Heliod's Pilgrim, since turn 4 we can play Pilgrim, get a Membrane and cast it right away. We also have 2 copies of Skywhaler's Shot as additional creature removal. That also lets us scry 1, and it's important that it's an instant, so we can keep up our counter spells, which we'll get to right now. We've got 2 copies of Scatter to the Winds, and 2 copies of Broken Concentration to help us protect our Mechanized Production and counter problematic cards like Planeswalkers. We also have 1 copy of Suppression Bonds as additional ways to answer Planeswalkers, and it's also something we can search up with our Heliod's Pilgrim, but it can also be put on other things besides creatures and Planeswalkers. Can also go on artifacts, for example, and that way the opponent can't crew them, because that's an activated ability. Then of course our Mechanized Production, which only has Alchemist Vial as targets in this deck. Then 3 copies of Glimmer of Genius to go with our instant speed counterspell package to draw us extra cards and find whatever we need. We also have 2 copies of Planar Outburst, which are very important to keep the board clean, and also has Awaken, so late in the game, let's say the opponent somehow dealt with our Mechanized Production, we still have another way of closing out the game with Awakened lands. Between this and part of Waterveil and our Scatter to the Winds, we have a few Awaken cards. And then we have Jace, Unraveler of Secrets, which can also draw us more cards. And in this deck it actually comes up quite often that we get to ultimate Jace, since we have so many ways of protecting him. And then finally part of Waterveil, which I already mentioned, is a very nice one in this deck, especially once we have the Mechanized Production engine going, since taking an extra turn when you get to draw 2 cards every turn is extra nice, and it also has Awaken should we need the alternate win condition here. And then our mana base, 7 plains, 9 islands, 2 Prairie Stream, 2 Glacial Fortress, 3 Aether Hubs, and we have a few ways of generating energy in this deck, so these are basically just untapped dual lands. And then 2 copies of Evolving Wilds, which go nicely with Telling Time if you want to shuffle away some cards. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which looks pretty good. We've got the turn 2 Vial, turn 3 Pilgrim, turn 4 Mechanized Production, as well as some more interaction. So hopefully our opponent's not on a super aggressive deck. But even if they are, we have Meltdown plus Pilgrim, could also just get another aura as well. Don't have to get the Mechanized Production. And we see a Salvage Drone, that's interesting. So opponent could be on an Eldrazi deck, or they could be maybe on a Reanimator deck. Who knows? We're just gonna play out a Vial here. And there is a small risk that our opponent ingests our only copy of Mechanized Production. So something to keep in mind, but I don't think we wanna waste an Aether Meltdown on it. Let's find out what our opponent is up to here. And what do they exile? Alright, just a land, that's good. Into a Glintsleeve Siphoner. So they have 1 energy at the moment, so Prairie Stream is not bad. So I think we'll just go ahead and play the Pilgrim. This puts a blocker into play and we can get the Mechanized Production. So next turn we can cast that, and we have a blocker for the Salvage Drone, and then we'll just have to find an answer for the Siphoner. Meltdown is not a great answer since our opponent can still attack and that way gain some energy to draw extra cards. If they have other ways to generate energy, then the Glintsleeve Siphoner staying in play is also not great for us. But we'll see. Attacking with both. So our opponent could maybe have something they want to discard with the Salvage Drone. But I think I will block here. And see what our opponent wants to discard. Maybe they just want to cycle it. And discard a Kozilek's Return. Alright, so our opponent could be playing some big Eldrazi perhaps. And this also means they are at least Grixis colors, so they could easily have a counterspell here for our Mechanized Production, so I don't think we want to play it out. I think I'll go with the Pilgrim and get ourselves the Membrane, which we can cast with Surge here. Which is not a great answer to the Siphoner, but at least prevents it from attacking. So they will only draw more cards if they have other ways of producing energy. And no spells from the opponent there. We could attack for one, but I'd rather have our creatures on defense just in case our opponent had a way of maybe bouncing the Membrane. Land number 4 into Wretched Gryph. Alright, so they're actually making good use of their own creature here. Emerge a Wretched Gryph, draw a card. And yeah, the opponent actually gets to cast the Kozilek's Return as well. So even though we don't care about our creatures dying, our opponent did get some good value out of their Wretched Gryph there. But now we get to resolve our Mechanized Production, which is all we care about. So let's go ahead and do that. And we also have an answer lined up for the Wretched Gryph in Aether Meltdown. So I think if we get to untap and our opponent doesn't do anything too scary here, like resolving a Planeswalker, then I like our chances, since next turn we'll have the Broken Concentration available. So our opponent hits us for 3. On the bright side, now the Glintsleeve is in the graveyard, so even if our opponent has other ways of generating energy, they will not be drawing any extra cards. But they do have a second Glintsleeve, so makes things a little trickier. And nothing else. So let's draw 2. And another Heliod's Pilgrim is not bad. So I think we just play another Alchemist Vial and then keep up Meltdown and Broken Concentration. So draw a card and say go. So let's see what our opponent wants to do. I think we just take the hit, keep up our counterspell, and then end of turn we can still play the Meltdown if our opponent doesn't do anything. Alright, we also see a Wastes. And let's just Meltdown end of turn. Opponent could also have Elder Deep Fiends they want to emerge, perhaps. Draw a card. Alright, Planar Outburst is not bad. So we can Outburst, but then we don't have enough mana to do anything else. So instead I think I like playing the Pilgrim. Getting another Meltdown perhaps. Unless our opponent wants to counter this. Spell Shrivel, that's fine. We'll just let it get countered. Could have played a land first, but I wanted to play the Evolving Wilds here. So we get to keep up Broken Concentration, and then next turn we can go Outburst and still keep up our counterspell. Do we see an emerged creature end of turn perhaps? Nope. Opponent happy to let this happen. So they'll draw an extra card from the Siphoner. Up to 7 lands over there. Hit us for 2, that's fine. We're already halfway there, but if our opponent has more emerged creatures, they can pretty cheaply emerge onto the Wretched Gryph. As we see another Salvage Drone, which is fine. Filigree Familiar, which is also fine. So we might see an emerged creature here somewhere, but our opponent did tap their mana in a weird way. So here we might see finally an emerged creature. No, still no. Alright. Now I think it's time to Planar Outburst here. Get rid of all those creatures. Our opponent does get to draw and discard with the Salvage Drone, and they also get to draw a card from the Filigree Familiar. But the important thing here is that the board is clean, and we have 2 counterspells in hand. So let's see what they get rid of. Just a land. And alright. It looks like we should be able to get there. So pretty much countering any significant threats. Filigree Familiar, not particularly scary, but our opponent can emerge onto it. So I think that's reason enough to just counter it. And Spell Shrivel is fine. So our opponent gets to keep their Familiar, but they don't get to emerge anything this turn. So it's just a 2/2. So now up to 6 Vials, 2 more turns to go. Found a Telling Time, which is not bad since we get to shuffle with Evolving Wilds. And yep, Glimmers are something I want. So we are not gonna shuffle here. Instead just play a land and say go. So we can Glimmer, still keep up Scatter. And there's an Elder Deep Fiend, just hardcast, tapping a whole bunch of Vials. So I think we want to just scatter this. We could Awaken, which is actually not bad since that gives us a blocker for the Familiar. But that does mean we don't get to Glimmer here. And I think Glimmering might be more important. Could also just let this resolve since it's just a 5/6 that we have plenty of answers for. So maybe we just want to Glimmer first, see what's our second card. Maybe that changes what we want to do. It's a Sram, which could block, but I don't think we want a Sram here. So let's just take the Glimmer, and there we go. Skywhaler shot, perfect. So now we can just use a Skywhaler shot on the Elder Deep Fiend, and we don't have to waste a valuable counterspell. So our opponent can hit us for 2 if they want. And then I'll go to 5 and still be in a pretty good spot. Can also scry here, land to the bottom. And draw 2 again. I don't think we want to Glimmer in response here. Telling Time, another good one. So let's Telling Time first. And yep, part of Waterveil, that's gonna do it. So now we just get to cast this and win the game. Alright, sweet. Vial number 8, and there we go. On to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which is actually not that great since we have 2 Pilgrims and a Production, which is not really what you want, so I think we can actually do better. And this is 6 lands, which is not great. Alright, so if we find a second land, then this hand could be alright, since Telling Time can hopefully find us the 3rd land, and then we have a decent control hand. We did find a land, but it comes into play tapped, which is still better than no land. So black-green from the opponent. Let's see if there's some sort of black-green counters deck. As we see Aether Hub making an energy into Heart of Kiran. Alright, we do have an answer in Skywhaler's shot for the Heart of Kiran, but that thing can hit pretty hard. As we did find an island, so if we play the island we can Telling Time, and I think we do, since there's a pretty good chance we find an untapped land with the Telling Time. There is of course a risk if we don't find an untapped land that we don't get to keep up our 3 mana spells on turn 3. But I really want to make sure we keep hitting land drops. And there we go, there's an island, and we can also take a Pilgrim. Alright, so opponent didn't do much, so that's good for us. Now we get to keep up both our counterspell and our Skywhaler's shot. I don't think we want to run out to Pilgrim yet. As we see Dragon Skull Summits. Alright, so our opponent actually didn't play anything that turn, which is still good for us. We can play it slow and sit on these counter spells and keep developing our mana base. And they're just saying go, which is not a great strategy. If we had something like a Glimmer of Genius here we could play. As long as we keep hitting land drops, we're fine. If we start missing land drops, then it could get awkward and we might be forced to play out our Pilgrim. As we see Oath of Gideon, that's fine. Don't need to counter that. So our opponent seems to be on a Super Friends deck rather than a Jund counters or energy deck. But Pilgrim can just block the 1/1s if we can find a land here, and we do. And I'm gonna get, I think, one of the ways to deal with planeswalkers here, which is either the Imprisoned in the Moon or the Suppression Bonds. And I don't think I want to ramp my opponent. The advantage of Imprisoned here is that with 6 mana we get to play Imprisoned and keep up a counterspell, but I'm sure we can find some more lands. So let's just take the Suppression Bonds here. And say go. So is our opponent finally gonna play out one of their planeswalkers? No, instead it's just a Sylvan Advocate, 2/3. So if the opponent's plan here is to crew the Heart of Kiran, we can just shoot it down with the Skywhaler's shot. Instead our opponent's just not doing anything, so that's fine. Now we found a Sram. I think we just keep saying go here. And we can take 2 from a Sylvan Advocate, that's fine. Opponent with a land number 5. They're just gonna attack us for 2. So we're gonna take it so that the Pilgrim can still block the 1/1s. Opponent still does nothing. Found another counterspell. So I think we will run out our Sram here, but we're not gonna counter any removal spell on him, just so we don't have to discard. And I will try to double block here and see what happens, unless our opponent has another land which grows the Sylvan Advocate. Another Oath of Gideon. And a Fatal Push on our Sram. So now our opponent is mostly tapped out. We could counter it, but then we don't have mana up for the Skywhaler's shot. So I think we just let this happen. And let's see if the opponent finally wants to crew the Heart of Kiran. They do. So now we get to shoot that down with our Skywhaler's shot. And get that thing out of here. And we're basically looking for lands here. So let's bottom the Pilgrim. And I don't think we block yet. There's a Mechanized Production, but we still haven't found a Vial. And we don't have any lands. We could Pilgrim again. And then find maybe an instant speed aura. Like this Meltdown, for example, to go on the Sylvan Advocate end of turn. Could get Imprisoned as another answer to Planeswalkers. But we'll just say go here. So the plan is to counter an opposing Planeswalker if our opponent has one. If they don't, then we can just Aether Meltdown end of turn on the Sylvan Advocate. So just the Sylvan Advocate getting in there, so we could chump, set up a Planar Outburst perhaps, but since we don't have enough lands to Planar Outburst and keep up a counterspell, I don't think we want to. So having these 1/2s to block the 1/1s is, I think, good. So let's just take the 4 here. If our opponent doesn't play anything worth countering, we can Aether Meltdown on the Sylvan Advocate, so we don't have to take a hit next turn. Opponent playing very, very passively here. And there's a land finally, so now we have Suppression Bonds as something we can play besides our counterspells. So we need one more land so we can Outburst plus keep up counters. But for now these Pilgrims are doing a decent job of blocking all the 1/1s, so there we see a Planeswalker making an appearance, so let's Broken Concentration. Could have scattered to have a 3/3 as well, but that just plays into the opponent's removal, and our lands are pretty valuable here. Alright, there's a land, so we could Outburst now, but our opponent actually doesn't have much of a threat going on the ground, so we can just keep saying go, and basically looking for an Alchemist Vial here to put the Mechanized Production on. Oath of Nissa is fine. Can find our opponent another Planeswalker perhaps. And it does. Nissa, Voice of Zendikar. Opponent tapping out for a Chandra. I think we just use the Broken Concentration on this Chandra. So we know opponent has a Nissa in hand. No attacks. And there's a Glimmer. Alright, that's perfect. So now we get to Glimmer, and I think we Glimmer main phase here just to try and hit some land drops since we still get to keep up Scatter. And Vial plus land is exactly what we want. So let's take both so we get to play the Vial and keep up our counterspell. Now that we did use all these counters, the downside is that we don't have a way of protecting the Mechanized Production. Let's say our opponent has an Anguished Unmaking. So we might have to be conservative with this Scatter to the Winds. Can just Suppression Bonds a Planeswalker as well here. There we see Anguished Unmaking on the enchantments. That's fine. Alright, so that's one Anguished Unmaking gone. And we can just chum block here and then follow up with Planar Outburst. So this is a pretty easy double chump. Does mean we don't get to play the production yet. So we might take some damage from these creature lands, but Imprisoned in the Moon is actually a decent answer to creature lands, so yeah, let's Planar Outburst here without Awakening. And say go. There's a Nissa, which I think I'm gonna let resolve. It's not the most threatening Planeswalker. And we have to keep the Scatter to protect our combo. Opponent could have another big Planeswalker here. Instead we see Shambling Vent getting in there for 2. Shambling Vent puts us to 10. A land is good, so now we get to Mechanized Production on the Vial. And we could Imprisoned in the Moon one of the lands, but the problem is our opponent has 2 more lands as well, so maybe we just Imprisoned the Nissa here. Still get to keep up our Scatter. And then next turn we can start drawing some cards with Jace. There's the Anguished Making, which should target our Alchemist Vial. And this one we have to counter with our Scatter. And our opponent should be out of ways to deal with the Vial. They could still have something like a Nahiri, which can exile the enchantments. But there's not much we can do about that. Our opponent on the beatdown plan hits us for 2. And now that they have this plant token, something like a Blessed Alliance could actually be pretty bad if they attack with the 0-1 plant. So now we get to draw 2. And another Planar Outburst is not bad. So let's play the Jace. And draw some cards. So we might have to awaken the Planar Outburst just to get a creature into play. But we'll see what the opponent does here. They could hit us for 4 with these creatures. And unfortunately we can't enchant the land with Suppression Bonds. So our opponent should be attacking with the plant token to play around Blessed Alliance. Let's see if they do. They are keeping the plant back, which I think is a mistake here. So we're down to 4. We kind of have to start thinking about using these vials on the creatures, just to prevent them from attacking. But we'll see here, as we draw 2 more cards. There's a Skywhaler shot and a Pilgrim. Alright, so I think we start by playing the Pilgrim, since that will shuffle the deck, so if we scry to the bottom, we don't get any cards we don't want. So Aether Meltdown, this will fall off the Shambling Vent once it's not a creature anymore, so it's actually not a great answer, but it can save us 2 damage for a turn, so I guess it's better than the other options. And then we will scry and draw. And Telling Time should be decent here. So I think now probably want a Telling Time main phase just to see what we can find, get some more information. And Vial plus a land, so let's get the Vial and the untapped land, I think. So I think we can play the Vial here. And then we still have Meltdown and Skywhaler shot at the ready. So let's see what the opponent comes up with, as we're already halfway there. And say Chandra, Torch of Defiance, which we do have the Suppression Bonds for, but she is gonna be able to either kill our creature or deal us 2 damage. Opponent found a Liliana, which they decide to cast instead of dealing us 2. Alright, that's fine. So shrink down our creature, that's also fine. Shambling Vent gets in there. So I think I'm gonna use the Aether Meltdown on it, even though it should fall off end of turn, but it does save us 2 damage and I don't want to chum block yet, and this is a good use of our mana here. So we don't take any damage here. We have the Suppression Bonds for the Chandra, which is the most threatening planeswalker at this point. So let's see if we can find a Blessed Alliance to gain us some life. Part to Waterveil is not bad, so let's plus first. And this can go to the bottom, ice over. So I think we can actually part to Waterveil with Awaken here. And I think we go to combat and try and attack one of the planeswalkers, force our opponent to chump with a plant token. We could actually use a Vial to prevent the token from blocking, but we can just attack next turn again. So our opponent chumps. So now we can go to our second turn. Draw 2 more cards. We have 6 Vials in play. And looks like our opponent is gonna throw in the towel. So we can play Sram, play Suppression Bonds on the Liliana and take out the Chandra. And let's fetch first. And then plus the Jace once more. We could ultimate, which might actually be better here, but the problem is these creature lands could still pose a threat. But yeah, let's plus once more. And Vial will do. Let's attack Chandra. Play Vial number 7, and we just have to survive 1 turn here. And between the Meltdown and the Skywhaler shot, that should not be a problem. And unfortunately the game froze here, which happens when you play Alchemist Vial sometimes, when you already have Mechanized Production in play, enchanting an Alchemist Vial. So we can't really do anything here, but I think we can safely assume that we would win the game next turn. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and concede, even though our opponent already left, and I think we would have won this game on our next upkeep, but there you go, unfortunate bug, but hopefully that will get fixed with the next release. So on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which looks alright. We've got a Telling Time, which can probably help, and 2 lands, so yeah, I think I'll keep. Basically need to find some more lands and then an Alchemist Vial so we can put the production on it. Blast Alliance could be good. So this Telling Time basically wants to find lands and vials, as we see Glintsleeve Siphoner, which at least we have the Blast Alliance as an answer. And no lands is very annoying. I guess we'll take an Outburst and a counterspell here. Just have to say go. And this is also gonna waste our only white source here, basically. As we see a Scrap Heap Scrounger. Not super big deal, since we do have ways to tap it down, or Aether Meltdown is also a good answer to the Scrap Heap. And there's a land that's good. Probably just want to play the Membrane. Could keep up a counter here, but at 4 mana there's nothing too scary. And I don't think we need to play the Pilgrim quite yet. So let's just play the Membrane here. So our opponent gets 1 attack with a Scrap Heap, and then it's gonna be tapped down permanently. And a Wild Size is an interesting play from the opponent, so +2/+2 and draw a card. But they don't get to do anything else for their turn, so this actually gives us quite a bit of time, as now we get to say go with our counterspell up. And hopefully we can find some lands so we can start glimmering. Another scrap heap. I think we still counter that, even though our opponent can return it end of turn. And a Longtusk Cub. So they're not going to return a scrap heap end of turn, but they do have a cub that they can give a +1/+1 counter. Alright, land is good, so I actually don't hate using Suppression Bonds here on the cub. Could save that to enchant a scrap heap and use this turn to just cast a Glimmer to find more lands, which is also pretty appealing. So yeah, maybe we just go for the Glimmer plan. And then next turn maybe Outburst, and then when the opponent starts bringing back scrap heaps, we have a Suppression Bonds for those. Opponent can hit us for 2. And they do decide to use the energy. If we had something like another Blessed Alliance here, we could still get the cub, but our opponent wants to be aggressive. And a Fleetwheel Cruiser post-combat, that's interesting. Alright. So we also have a Suppression Bonds for the Fleetwheel Cruiser, and lands is good here. Do we want both lands or just one? I think we want just the one for now, as we might draw more. Yeah. Skywhaler's Shot also not bad. So we could actually play it slow and then just use the Skywhaler Shot on the Fleetwheel Cruiser, and we also get to Telling Time, and then we get to Outburst whatever our opponent played to crew the Fleetwheel Cruiser. Seems good. Opponent brings back a scrap heap to crew the cruiser. That's fine, so that's a creature gone from the graveyard. Hopefully your opponent doesn't have Blossoming Defenses, as that could be pretty bad for us. Instead, that works, and now I think I will top the land. We can still decide what to take with the Telling Time, but a land is always useful. So cub up to a 4/4. Hopefully our opponent plays another creature here. As we see Bristling Hydra, that's just perfect. So our opponent taps out for a creature that's very hard to deal with for this deck. Unless we have Planar Outburst, and luckily we have it. So now we get to sweep our opponent's board. They will be able to get back 2 scrap heaps next turn, but this Outburst definitely buys us a lot of time. Plus we can also play the Pilgrim to find a Aether Meltdown, which is a nice answer to the scrap heap. So let's see what the opponent wants to do here. Obnixilis, alright, so Suppression Bonds can also answer Obnixilis, and they still get to return one of their scrap heaps if they want to. And a Pilgrim, so we can go Pilgrim and then Suppression Bonds and get a Aether Meltdown, and then this turn we can maybe chum block with the Pilgrim. Could also go get an Imprisoned in the Moon as another answer to Obnixilis, but I think Suppression Bonds is a fine play here. So the second Pilgrim could also get another Meltdown, which means we have answers for both scrap heaps, and then hopefully the Glimmer can start finding us pieces of the combo, so we can actually start winning the game. So I will jump here. And next turn we have enough mana for Pilgrim, get Meltdown, and then cast both Meltdowns. Counterspell's also not bad. So there we see another scrap heap getting returned. Let's see how many creatures our opponent still has in the graveyard. No creatures left. So if we find, let's say, in a few turns a second Planar Outburst that we're forced to cast, then it's good to know that our opponent doesn't have a ton of creatures they can return. So here we can block and then still use a Meltdown. And I'll use one here too, just to be mana efficient. And that way we still have our chum blocker for later. So opponent with 2 cards left and they don't do anything, that's good. And yep, there's the other outburst, which we don't really want to cast here. And yes, we have 7 mana. We could main phase Glimmer since we still get to keep up Scatter just to hit our land drops. But I think doing it instant speed is still fine here. We might want to awaken Scatter. So let's Glimmer first here just to get some more information on what we're working with. Another Aether Meltdown is not a perfect answer to the Cub since our opponent has a bunch of energy. So perhaps we want to just bottom both. And we did find a Vial. Alright, so I will let the Cub resolve here. We can chump it for a turn, and if our opponent plays a bunch more creatures, we do have the other Outburst at the ready. Alright, part the Waterveil. So now we just need our Mechanized Production. We could part the Waterveil right now. Let's see, we've got 8 mana. We could even awaken the Planar Outburst. But I kind of like playing part of Waterveil when we already have the Alchemist Vial Mechanized Production going. This might be a case where we just need to part the Waterveil just to buy us an extra draw step. But I think we can still say go here and keep up our Scatter. And if our opponents... Alright, there's a Nissa, which I think is worthy of a counterspell, and I think I'll awaken and put it on the Aether Hub. Didn't want our opponent to get a Nissa going. Opponent can pump the Cub a bunch of times. So let's see if they have a removal spell for the Pilgrim here that they want to use. And if we have untapped mana, our opponent should be attacking with the scrap heaps to play around another Blessed Alliance. So Cub gets in there. We will chump. Another Alchemist Vial, which I think I'll play here. And there's a Blessed Alliance. Alright, so our opponent didn't attack with these scrap heaps last turn, so maybe they won't do the same here. So we'll just keep our land on defense for now and hope that only the Cub attacks. Alright, this time our opponent is attacking with everyone. So we could just chump again. Opponent doesn't have any creatures in the graveyard right now. Alright, I don't hate chumping here. Once again. And now we can Planar Outburst. Our opponent only gets to return 1 scrap heap. And if we want, we can also awaken this. So 4, 9. And this gives us a blocker for Scrap Heap, although our opponent could easily just have a Fatal Push for the island. Alright, no removal spell end of turn, that's good. Let's see if they have one now. Could have another pump spell, like they did show us the wild size, but our opponent's just gonna play defense, which is very good for us. And could go for the part of Waterveil here. Start attacking, being more aggressive. Don't hate that. So a 9. Could put it on the same land. And since our opponent didn't kill our land and attack, it's pretty safe to assume they don't have an answer to our island here. So yeah, let's awaken. And if our opponent doesn't have anything, we can actually just kill them with this land, which is gonna attack twice. Once here and once in the extra turn. Alright, let's go for it. Alright, sweet. Part of Waterveil got there, didn't even need our Mechanized Production here. I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this gameplay, and as always, have a nice day.